Do you want to start catching spawning bass from your fishing kayak? We're going to talk about that.
Welcome back to another episode of 5-Minute Fish Talk.
I just finished my coffee, but I'm still excited. Why? Because it's springtime and I've got 5 minutes on this timer here, and you know what that means. Boop! It's time to get real. Catching spawning bass is super fun, and it's a great way to catch a big fish. Here's the thing though, we can all agree that it's quite the challenge, especially for us kayak fishing folks. So, I wanted to cover down on exactly that subject, give a couple pointers that I think might help you catch some mondos this year, and then hopefully you catch some mondos this year. So, we're going to get to that in 2 seconds, but before we get into the boat positioning and some of the techniques, I want to talk about this. It's very important this time of year to take really good care of those fish. Please do not take them out of the water and take pictures for 15 minutes. Please get them just right back to the water because they're very sensitive this time of the year and they're protecting what will be the future generations of fish for those lakes that we fish in. So please do keep that in mind and try to take really good care of the fish that you're catching. Okay, so now that we talked about that, let's talk about really the two main things that I want to discuss. One is boat positioning, and then the next will be techniques for catching spawning bass. First, boat positioning, because that is the absolute #1 major key for becoming a good spawn fisherman. I can tell you one thing, when I had my bass boat, I had a whole lot easier time catching spawning bass because I had a trolling motor. In a kayak, you are the trolling motor. It's not easy to keep your boat positioned, especially when you add a little bit of wind in the mix. But obviously there's a couple ways that we can try to get better at this. I think the most preferable way is if we just had a power pole on our kayaks. The likelihood is you don't have that because that's very expensive. I will never have one of those myself, so I gotta do it the old-fashioned way. You can do it a couple different ways. You've seen probably in the last couple years of videos that I've made, I've done lots of different things. In one video I even wedged my paddle underneath my armpit, jammed it into the dirt, and then I was flipping with one hand, and I catch fish that way. Other times I'll jam my kayak up into trees or up on the bank and then I'll fish for like that. But I guess the most preferable way would be to use an anchor system. Now you've probably seen that I was stubborn last year and for whatever reason I kept forgetting my anchor. But what it comes down to is using an anchor system will allow you to position yourself to where you don't move too terribly much and you can really work on a fish. A lot of things that I've learned from the last couple years is that it might take 45 minutes to catch a fish, and that's not easy if your boat keeps moving around, so try to keep it in one position. Now, one thing to keep in mind when you are anchoring your kayak, if you're running a similar anchor system to what I use, which is the trolley system, just make sure that you allow for some slack, because what's going to happen is you can drop an anchor right here and you're still going to drift over here. It's not going to be exactly on top of your anchor, so please do allow for that. Make sure you're checking where the wind direction is, and the other thing that you want to keep in mind is where the sun is. Never position to where you're standing and your shadow is being cast down over the bed. That's always going to turn the fish off and it's going to make it harder for you to see your lure. I'm not saying you can't catch fish that way. I'm saying that you will increase your odds drastically if you do not do that in the first place. So those are some of my main tips. Now obviously I'm assuming that you can stand in your kayak. Not everybody can. So what I'm going to tell you for people that can't stand in their kayak, it's going to be much harder for you. And I don't have a perfect tip for you, but I would say that you're going to want to make sure that you're really being stealthy and trying to look for those fish. And then once you do see those fish, try to keep your distance, and you might not be able to see your bait while you're fishing for them, but if you can find the bed and then approach it very stealthily, do it that way and try to fish from. You definitely have a little bit more challenge than folks like me that can fortunately stand in our kayaks. Regardless, those are my tips. If there's other things on boat positioning that I can comment on, please do just comment on the, in the comments below, and I'll try to reply back. The other thing that I want to talk about is actual techniques. Now, you've seen me kayak fish for spawning bass several times, and so you kind of probably already know what I like to throw. What it comes down to is constantly rotate your baits. Flip a creature bait, and then flip a jig, and then flip a tube, and then flip a swim bait, and then flip a drop shot. The list goes on and on and on. I would say my 3 favorite baits would be something like a creature bait that's got the colors of a bluegill, because bass absolutely hate bluegill this time of year. So that's always my go-to. The next thing that I like is throwing actually like a drop shot, and I like to use a white bait here. So something like this little thing right here. It's an old hand-poured bait that I used to make, but it's a really small, very subtle 3-inch white drop shot bait, and I love doing that because if they eat the bait, they pretty much have to eat the whole thing because it's so small. The other thing is, because it's white, I can see it down there, and it's elevated off of a drop shot with about a 6 to 8 inch leader, and so I can really see it down there. If they eat it, it's game on. I'm gonna catch them. The other thing that I like, for whatever reason, I've always had luck with a swim bait. On a stand-up jig. Wow! Holy shnikes, I never go 5 minutes, so I kind of forgot that that existed. But a stand-up jig with a swim bait or any other bait, it really comes down to confidence. But those are the 3 that I like to rotate because I just simply catch a lot of fish that way. Regardless, those are my tips for catching spawning bass out of a kayak. I can't comment on everything, so please do just drop a comment below if there's other things that I missed. Otherwise, you can definitely look out for future kayak fishing videos as I start catching spawning bass. Hopefully you'll pick up a few things there as well. Regardless, you know what I'm going to say next, right? Have yourself a fantastic weekend, and we'll catch you next time.